It's time for the 10th anniversary special, which aired in December 1972. So it's really the 9 years and 1 month special, which is rubbish. It's the first multi-Doctor special, so we get to see William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton again. Although Troughton only left a couple of years earlier, so it's like if Peter Capaldi came back for the 60th anniversary. But it is great to see him again. He really livens up the story and has a great rapport with Jon Pertwee. William Hartnell is obviously very ill and stumbles over his lines a bit, but I guess without him there wouldn't have been a story. And he did die not long after, so they were probably lucky to get him while they could. Omega is the big villain of the story, with a really impressive mask, which makes him look a bit like the man with the stick from Vickery's Big Night Out. But the actor has a good voice, so he sells the part well enough. The Delgados do look absolutely ridiculous though. They're just a load of bubbles and not at all scary. Benton and the Brigadier have a lot more to do than usual, as they're basically the Second Doctor's companions. They're a bit like Mulder and Scully here, with Benton taking everything in his stride and the Brigadier refusing to believe anything the Doctor says. It does make him look a bit silly after everything he's been through over the years, but it's very funny all the same. Where the story does fall down is that it's all a bit simple. Omega brings the Doctors to him, and then it's just the usual round of escapes and recaptures until the end. Hopefully the 60th anniversary story will have a bit more of a plot. Overall, for such an important story, it's really not very good. 5.
Step right up, step right up. It's me, the Punch and Judy man from Heidi High, here to talk to you about Carnival of Monsters. Sadly, Wolfie Smith's girlfriend couldn't be with me today, but never mind. Yeah, this isn't really working, is it?
So, Carnival of Monsters. Well, this feels in a completely different league to the last few stories. It's possibly the first classic era story that could easily be part of the new series. Obviously not visually, but the script is absolutely good enough to stand up to the most recent entries. Robert Holmes has really come into his own here, with a script full of imaginative ideas and memorable characters, but most of all full of witty dialogue, which is always a pleasure to hear. The structure is highly unusual as well. The first episode gives you 2 separate stories, with no indication of how they might connect. Then there's 2 episodes of the Doctor and Jo running around the miniscope, being commented on by the onlookers, and only when the Doctor joins the aliens in part 4 can the story be resolved. There's also no real villain as such. Kalik's attempt to take over the planet is very much a subplot, and we don't even see what happens to him at the end. And Vorg is more of a rogue and scoundrel rather than a villain, but he's always extremely entertaining to watch. Visually, the show doesn't hold up nearly as well. The sets are unconvincing and the makeup is dodgy, and the Droshigs are highly unconvincing, looking more like sock puppets than deadly threats. But none of that matters, you can just look past that and enjoy the story for what it is. Overall, in spite of the dodgy visuals, it's still one of my favourite stories. I'll give it a 9. This is the first real space opera episode since The Space Pirates, which was many years ago and in black and white. The effects have got a lot better since then, with model spaceships nearly as good as those in Blake 7, and even a few spacewalk sequences, which are not entirely convincing, but at least they're trying. We also have improved technology in the sets, with small portable TVs all over the place, and giant screens taking up a whole wall, which certainly feels very prescient. There aren't any mobile phones, but still it's pretty close. The Draconians make their first and so far only appearance in Doctor Who. It's a shame they haven't come back, as it makes a nice change to have an intelligent alien race that's equal to humans but not necessarily hostile. They could easily be built up in the same way that Klingons have in Star Trek. Though I guess the makeup would have to be more sophisticated so that you can more easily identify who was who. We also have the return of the Master, which would be a big surprise if you hadn't already spotted him on the cover of the DVD. It's Roger Delgado's final appearance, and it's great to see him do his thing one last time. Especially enjoyable is episode 4, which is basically a 3-hander, with Pertwee, Banning and Delgado. And the scene where Jo resists the Master's hypnosis shows how far both characters have come. The show will not be the same without him. As for the story, it is admittedly padded out quite a lot, with Jo and the Doctor being thrown into one prison cell after another. But the story also keeps bringing in new elements. First the Ogrons, then the Master, and finally the Daleks, so it never has time to get repetitive. The ending is admittedly a bit of a confusing mess, and we shall see how much of that is resolved in the next story. Overall, it's a decent stab at doing a galactic epic. I'll give it a 7.
The main problem with this is that Terry Nation doesn't seem to have been informed that this was a sequel to Frontier in Space, so all the loose ends from that story go unresolved. In fact, Nation apparently hasn't watched the programme since the 60s, so this is very much a throwback to the earliest Dalek stories, with Thals, jungles and Dalek cities all present and correct, and new ideas unfortunately nowhere to be seen. The first episode is probably the best, with Jo taking centre stage, going off on her own into the jungle, and narrating her thoughts into a little tape recorder. It allows Katy to take the lead for once, and the emotions as Jo and the Doctor believe each other to be dead or near death really brings their partnership to the fore, just one story before it ends. Unfortunately, this focus on emotions doesn't last long, and the story soon falls back onto the same tired old tropes.
The Daleks are more impressive than they were in Day of the Daleks. There are certainly a lot more of them now. But the only one who really sticks out is the Golden Dalek Supreme, who only shows up at the end. The Spyridons are all either invisible or wearing purple furs, so it's hard to really register them as characters, let alone know what to make of them. And the Thals all have the same blonde hair and identical costumes, so it's hard to tell them apart from Bernard Horsfall as Taryn, whose distinctive voice sets him apart from the rest. The biggest missed opportunity is that it sets up the idea of the Daleks experimenting on the Spyridons to become invisible, and then does absolutely nothing with it. The idea of an army of invisible killer Daleks is really good, but sadly the only invisible Daleks in the story are already dead, which isn't scary at all. Overall, it's pretty terrible, and definitely not what you would expect from a Dalek story. 3. This starts out feeling like the most contemporary story in years, with miners, milkmen, hippies and factory workers all combining to make a believable portrait of life in a Welsh village. And the first few episodes build up the threat nicely. From green slime, to the maggots, to the giant fly. So it all feels more or less believable. The realism is kind of spoiled when the talking computer boss shows up. He's a wonderfully sinister off-screen presence. But once his true nature is revealed, he's just another megalomaniac computer out to take over the world, which is a bit disappointing. The visuals are also a letdown. The maggots look convincingly disgusting, but the giant fly doesn't really work. And there are a lot of dodgy scenes shot against green screen, which really stand out as artificial to the modern day viewer. Where the show does stand out is with Jo's storyline, as the story of how she leaves the Doctor and goes off with Cliff Jones is about as emotional as the show has ever got. And the suggestion that the Doctor might have developed feelings for his companion is decades ahead of his time. It's many years before they allow that to happen again. Jo and Cliff do have great chemistry, as the actors work together in real life, and after following Jo's story for 3 years, it's great to see her finally get a happy ending. It's also a strong story for the unit team. The Brigadier finally gets to be a proper leader again. And Mike Yates is much more convincing as an undercover secret agent type than he ever was in uniform. Overall, the effects have aged quite badly, but the emotional conclusion to Jo's storyline more than makes up for that. So I'll give it a 9. So it's been another season with plenty of ups and downs. The decision to end the Doctor's exile has definitely paid off. Even though the season still begins and ends with unit stories set on Earth, they do at least both contain scenes set on alien planets. So it feels like there's a lot more variety than those before. It also seems that the Doctor can now control the TARDIS, at least as far as always being able to return to Unit HQ in the same time zone that he came back from. So we'll see how long that lasts. Jo Grant leaving is a shame, but she had 3 years, which is a good one for a companion, and it's about time somebody else got a chance. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with my thoughts on Season 11 in probably the middle of May, so subscribe if you don't want to miss that.
Meanwhile, you can follow the link in the description to see the playlist of all my Doctor Who videos so far. See you next time.